Good morning all, good morning all, welcome to the session for HeadFit Live. We're really grateful to be here today. My name is Pritchard and I have three incredible humans here who are here to talk to us about some of the challenges that are facing our defence and emergency services personnel. I'm really stoked to be able to talk about this important topic of PTSD. This is a wider topic, obviously. This is one of many challenges for mental health that can face our people in emergency services. And so we really just want to be able to face into that and lean into that. And so I'm just going to introduce each of our guests in turn, and they can talk a little bit about their story, their journey, and then we're going to get some insights from them about this very important space. And so our first guest today is Adele Saunders. Welcome, Adele. Kia ora.
Morena, Grant. Morena.
Hey, welcome. So Adele is a registered psychologist. She works with St John in New Zealand, and she manages their psychological health and wellbeing team. And Adele, I understand your calling in life is to support people who need help and who care for others, and those people are our St John first line, frontline emergency services staff. Welcome, Adele.
Thanks, Grant. Thank you.
Kia ora. Just talk to us a little bit about kind of how you got into this space. What do you do at St John? We'd love to hear more about that.
Awesome. Well, you've kind of done my introductions, haven't you? So I'm a psychologist, born and raised in the north in Whangarei, and went away and studied psychology because I think it was my calling to help people. I love helping people, and I probably sometimes smother people with my help as well. So got into psychology and have really been working in the trauma space for a number of years now. With young children, adolescents, families, etc. And my previous role was doing a lot of that work, and then alongside that, just felt a real passion for supporting the staff who were working alongside some really troubled youth. And as a part of that, started doing some work for St John on the side with their peer support group, and loved that. Loved caring for the carers. That's what I talk about, sort of supporting those, supporting others. And when this job came up at St John to become the manager of, or it was actually the psychologist at the time, but now the manager of psychological health and wellbeing, I jumped at the chance. So I'm love my role, absolutely love it. Don't get me wrong,
Wonderful.
there's challenges, absolutely. But yeah, work alongside a bunch of amazing people at St John to help support our sort of psychological roadmap and how we look after our people who are on the front line.
Fantastic. Welcome aboard, Adele. And we've also got Rebecca here. So Rebecca Nelson, welcome to the show. Great to see you. So Rebecca is, lovely. Rebecca is a reservist in the Royal New Zealand Navy. You've got a very untraditional path towards where you are right now. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about you. Some people who are watching will know who you are and have heard your music and your amazing singing, but some people may not. And I'd just love to, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Rebecca Nelson. I wear many different hats. I started singing when I was young, and then I was discovered by the Royal New Zealand Navy about 8 years ago when I was busking in Auckland, and that has really led me to the work that I'm doing today. I've always said that if I was ever given a platform to use it for good, and I've been very lucky to work with some amazing people and meet incredible veterans all around the world, here in New Zealand and in England, and from everywhere. And so to be able to start a new charity for New Zealand Defence, but also for our first responders, is pretty awesome. I'll talk more about that later, but so
welcome
that's
aboard.
A little bit about who I am.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And lastly on the panel this morning, we've got Craig Macdonald. He's the founder and director of All About People. That's a health and safety specialist organisation in New Zealand. He's got his own amazing story. He's a volunteer firefighter. Welcome to the show, Craig.
Good morning, Grant.
Great to see you, mate. Talk to us a bit about your journey. Why you're here today, what you hope to kind of share with our listeners and watchers this morning.
Well, a little bit about my background and how I got here. So originally a high country sheep and cattle farmer from central Otago. Moved up to Auckland, needed and wanted a completely different change in life. Sort of went through, did a degree in business management, but ended up in health, safety and wellbeing, working with several organisations, and ended up, as you said, starting up our own business all about people. So health, safety, wellbeing is a very, very strong interest. And when I joined as a volunteer firefighter about 17 years ago, realised some of the impacts and some of the issues around mental health, well-being with some of the calls, etc., that we went to. So leading to where we are today, I've also got a son and a daughter's boyfriend in the police, and they've been to some pretty horrendous calls recently. And it was my daughter's boyfriend that suggested that we start taking some action, which we'll talk about shortly.
That's wonderful. Great. Welcome to the show, Craig. So what I might do just to set the scene a little bit is just throw to Adele, just given your experience in this space, this is your life. This is your bread and butter. This is your specialty. And so you're sort of seeing and feeling and hearing about all of the challenges that our emergency first responders can face day to day. So I'd love it if you could share a little bit about what are the kind of top challenges our frontline responders are facing. And if you could zoom in a little bit later on the PTSD aspect of that, I'd love that if you could just share a little bit of the kind of basics for our people.
Absolutely, no problem. Well, do put me back on track if I sort of swerve off somewhere and start talking about something too deeply. I realize that we've got short amount of time. So I think I just want to start with, it's not really all doom and gloom. Like, I think for our first responders and our defence force, they're typically really resilient people. They are people that kind of choose these jobs as a calling, as a passion, as something where they find purpose. And so usually they are very, very incredibly resilient people. On top of that, I guess you've got to consider the nature of the work, and we consider it a sort of a high risk environment for psychological distress. You think about when we're thinking about our ambulance officers, our police, our fireys, our defence force, they're often faced with human suffering, with not so nice human behaviour, and on top of that they've got shift work, they've got the kind of interpersonal dynamic, so it's a really complex job. So they have to obviously be very, very purposeful and intentional about how they look after themselves. But regardless of that, there's always times where there's challenges and things get on top of them. So we are talking about, anything around psychological distress, anxiety, depression, burnout, everything that kind of comes with that whole gambit. And of course, PTSD, which is something that we're going to talk a little bit more about today, obviously. So usually very resilient people, but of course, when we have lots of exposure to really traumatic jobs, the kind of pace and nature of the work, what's going on at the moment with the pandemic, things have been really challenging in that space, resourcing, etc., can really get on top of people. So specifically around PTSD, I think it's really important to recognise that when we look at PTSD in the general population, we're looking at about a 4% amount of people based on their exposure to trauma. And when we're looking at emergency personnel, it's around 8 to 10% based on the different kind of service lines there. So it's about twice the amount of the general population. So it's not sort of 95% and it's not 100%, which is some people might assume that it's sort of an outcome of anybody that's going to be a first responder or an emergency service personnel, that they're going to get PTSD. That's not actually the case. It's around 8 to 10%. And such PTSD is essentially a diagnosed mental health disorder in the DSM, and there's a bunch of criterion that people need to reach to basically reach that threshold to get that diagnosis. But the thing is that the symptoms or the criteria for that are typical responses and normal responses to being in a distressing or traumatic situation. So they're things like hyperarousal, so feeling really anxious and kind of emotionally provoked. It's about re-experiencing, so flashbacks, dreaming, that sort of thing. Sleep kind of interruptions. So these are things that are typical to being in traumatic experience, they do need to occur for at least a month, and they need to have significant impact on our functioning. So it's not just a couple of sort of sleepless nights where you might have some re-experiencing, and it might not be something that you sort of have for just a week and then it starts to dissipate. So it's a significant diagnosis. And I think some of the inaccurate beliefs around that is that, that some of our staff sort of have, I got PTSD, I'm 2 days out of going to a shooting, and just to say, well, no, probably that's a really normal response to that. So it's about making sure that we're careful about how we look at that term, and we don't want people to think that it's an inevitable outcome of becoming a first responder, because the problem with that is they're not going to put in interventions earlier when they are having those sleepless nights, or they are having those kind of relationship challenges and things, because they're all sort of in there under their rock or whatever. That we want them to be intervening early, and not thinking that this is an inevitable outcome and just kind of laying back and allowing PTSD to creep in.
That is so good. That really gives me a lot of hope, and I think that's it's just really great to hear that, right? So PTSD, it's not in the job description, in a way,
not.
You know what you're signing up for. You're going to be helping people. Some of these people will be in the kind of worst time of their lives, right? But it's great to see that there's something that we can do about it up front to prevent it, and then when we do notice that people are in distress and they are, coming to Adele, that we can get them the support that they need. Thank you so much, Adele. That sort of lifted a little bit on that. So we're just going to go to Rebecca now and just share. I think given what we see, Rebecca, with our emergency first responders, with our Defence Force staff, they are put. There is, in some ways, there is a bit of trauma in their job description, right? They're, in a sense, in the workplace, they can be living in trauma. I just go to an office every day and sit at a desk and type on a keyboard, and so my work world is a whole lot less intense. And you've got something that you've developed. It's an amazing charity. I'd love to hear a little bit more about it, what it's all about, why it's here, and how did this come into being?
Yeah, well, Te Kiwi Māia was started about just over 2.5 years ago now. I was over in the UK singing over there, and I was catching up with a friend. She was telling me her story and how she ended up at a place called Tedworth House, which is with the charity Help for Heroes. Now, they had saved her life, and which is amazing, and I hadn't heard about this place before, so obviously I went and had a look at it, and I was walking around this facility and they had everything. They had accommodation for all the veterans and their families. They had music therapy, they had art therapy, they had other therapies, they had horticulture, animals, what you can name, they had it. And I couldn't understand why there was nothing like that here in New Zealand, because what was available overseas was just amazing. So I came home and I started asking questions. I sat down with everyone, all the chiefs from all the organisations, and I just said, look, this is the time that we have to start collaborating and we have to work together. New Zealand's too small and we're all one people. So we created Te Kiwi Māia. And so, which is really awesome. So we work with Defence and also all the first responders. And we are going, hopefully, we're on the way to get a property here in New Zealand so we can create our own facility for our people to go get the respite care when they need. Yeah, so to have the time out. We don't want to be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. We'd love to get them way before that if we could. That will be our main goal. But yeah, so we're going to be offering courses there for people to come and have that time, but also learn the skills that they need to be able to live their best lives and to be able to keep doing the job that they want to do.
That's so cool. That's so cool. I wish you all the best with that. So, and for people who might be listening who don't have Te Reo Māori as their first language, what does Te Kiwi Māia stand for?
It means the courageous Kiwi. So when we were coming up with a name for this, everyone has courage in what they do. And for every day, you have to have some sort of courage to get up and go to work. But our first responders and Defence Force, they have a lot of courage. They are amazing people, and they have to have it through their entire career. Whether they, first day they sign the line, then the next they got to go through the training, and then the next they have to learn their job and do the job every day, and then they have to have courage to leave the job. So our people are very courageous, and I admire them hugely. So that's why we came up with that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And sorry, hats off to you. And look, if you're looking at finding out more about how you might be able to support Te Kiwi Māia, do head over to give a little page and put a bit in behind them, because I think that's just an amazing taonga that we might be creating for our defence force and emergency personnel, and amazingly including their families, right? Because that's one of those missing. That's the firefighter or police officer or ambulance officers support that you just don't see. That's the people around them and their home world who are there for them. And so the fact that you've made space for that, I think it's just that's going to be an incredible resource and support for our people. So thank you so much. We're now going to go to Craig. So Craig, you and I had a chat about this about a week ago, and I was like, we should be sharing what is happening here with this amazing ride that you're about to do, and we can talk more about that later on in the show. But I think to introduce, your day job is health, safety, and well-being. That's your kind of bread and butter, but over and above that, you're a volunteer firefighter and have been for many years. And I'd love to hear more from you as an emergency first responder yourself. What does it actually mean to be a firefighter? What does it feel like? Why do you do it? What does it look like? Is it all about saving cats and dousing flames? What does putting on that uniform mean for you in practice? And I understand that it's a bit of a double-edged sword, and I'd love to hear a little bit more from you on your firefighting journey.
Thanks, Grant. So originally when I first joined, it was more about, I was working in Auckland City, traveling in and out every day, spending some long hours away from home, and I had very little engagement in the local community. So it was something that always interested me, and I joined the local fire brigade thinking that would be a really good in to meet some people and get a little bit more involved. So I sort of thought that, yes, saving cats, the odd fire, the odd car crash. But what I didn't realise is that the brigade I joined also, at the moment, I think it currently sits at around 70% of medical responses or first responses. So okay. So it's a different space, and we go to quite a few serious events with that. So things around volunteering, fire and emergency, and there's also volunteers with St John's, Coast Guards, etc. So I'd say this is a similar theme through all of those organisations. One, it can be a very rewarding and satisfying experience. So you make a difference to a lot of people at any time of the day, night, weekend, etc. So like I said, that's very rewarding and satisfying. It's a huge commitment. So whether you're paid or whether you're a volunteer, there's a big commitment in time, emotional investment, and so on. So for myself and a lot of other volunteers, you've got a full-time job. Then depending on how your volunteering is structured, you've also almost got another full-time job in a completely different capacity. When it comes to stress and emotional well-being around the work that we do, there's a number of factors come into play for that. So obviously there's the events, etc., that you go to, but also you've got family commitments, you've got work commitments. So there's a lot of other stressors on your life that can have an impact on that as well. So I suppose building on a bit of what Adele and Rebecca have said, it's around having some really good support in place to help you build a little bit of resilience, know who to talk to when you need to, etc. It's having good people in your organisation, whether it's like an officer that leads you on your watch or whatever, that's able to prepare you as you go to a call, do a debrief afterwards, and so on. And also have the follow-up, the ability to talk and to seek help when you need it.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And look, Craig, I just had one follow-up for you. I think one of the, I see, you see just as a normal Kiwi just wandering around the street, you'll see like a firefighting team or an ambulance with some officers or some police on the street doing their job, doing their thing. And when you see them in the uniform, it can evoke lots of different emotions for people. And so I just wondered if you could touch on what that uniform kind of means for you day to day, why it's good, and then what the downside of that might be, just so that people get a kind of feel for the kind of the pros and cons of being a kind of a uniformed first responder.
The uniform is very useful because, as you can imagine, when you're dealing with some reasonably serious incidents, it gives you a level of authority to be able to make decisions, talk to people, and provide support and so on. But on the flip side of that, and I don't know if it's the right word, but it can be a little bit, it dehumanizes the first responder to a certain degree, because all the public see is a uniform and they don't realize that that person is a person just like themselves. And they're going through a number of emotions. They're having to keep it cool. They're having to make some sometimes critical decisions which might have an impact on somebody's health and well-being. And also at the end of a call, so for me, for example, if I went to something that was fairly traumatic, it didn't matter what time of day or night, I'd usually go and have a shower just to wash some of that stuff away. And also you end up having chats with your colleagues or with your family that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be having as well. So I suppose the key message from that is that people in uniform are people as well, and they go through many of the same emotions that people in the general public do.
Wow, that is so important. Thank you for sharing that, Craig. So you see the person, don't just see the badge. And I think that's a really important message for people to take out of this in terms of a practical thing you can do. Like, you can't necessarily just, well, you can actually help, if they ask for some help, if you're wondering why, you can help a first responder and give them some support, but also you can just see them as more than just a badge or a uniform. Thank you for sharing that. And, you talked about some of those great things within an organization or a workplace environment that can make a positive difference. And I think, Adele, you're seeing this day to day, week to week. What do you see as those big organizational challenges and real opportunities for us to better support our first responders? What do you think's working well, and what do you think might just take us from good to great when it comes to really looking out for our people and keeping them thriving?
So there was a big piece of research done several years ago in Australia by Beyond Blue called Answering the Call, and they did a massive sort of survey and interviews of first responders, fire, police, SAS and ambulance. And essentially out of that, the top controls were identified for psychological distress, number one being collegial and managerial support, second being peer support, so a trained form of peer support staff that understand the nature of the work that the personnel from police or from fire or from ambulance engage in and can provide that sort of psychological first aid, and then sort of an EAP equivalent, so sort of external psychologists and counsellors or internal psychologists and counsellors that can assist in helping process what the staff are trying to manage. So I think at St John and actually some of the other first responder organisations as well are looking at those. So training our managers and our staff generally around how they can support staff, how they can identify early warning signs, have a conversation, intervene early. You're not your normal. What's going on? I'm noticing this about you. And that takes time because it takes a level of relationship to understand when someone's not their normal, because, hypervigilance or hyperactivity might actually be someone's normal. But to someone else, that might be an early indicator of something going on. So it does take time, and so that's something around sort of organisational culture. And so I think at St John, what we're trying to do is address sort of stigma. That's a big piece of work. We all come from organisations that have got that sort of history of stoicism and concrete pill and harden up, buttercup, walk it off sort of thing. And we need to be addressing that and showing a level of vulnerability. So we've got some amazing leaders in our organisation who are sort of role models, who people look up to, who who are, who regularly talk about their struggles, who will become vulnerable, become emotional. We've got videos of some of our incredible leaders talking about that, and that's really powerful for our staff to give permission for them to say, I'm struggling, I'm not okay, and reaching out for support. We're trying to address that slowly, but it's a big beast to move, and I think other organisations are doing the same thing. Investing in programs that we know work. So peer support, for instance, is a really, really good program, and making sure we've got really good providers of that sort of therapeutic intervention that understand trauma, they're trauma informed, they understand the complex nature that is first response, they understand the shift work, the interpersonal dynamics, the organisational culture. We are a little bit unique. So making sure we've got really good people to provide the support in that space, and that seems to be really effective, while at the same time helping people develop internal insight into themselves. What works for one person when it comes to managing kind of trauma responses or just distress in general doesn't work for everybody. So making sure that we're helping people develop a way in which they can understand, what are my early warning signs? What should I be looking for as an indicator that things aren't going well? So that I call them the first responders in their own psychological mental health, because really they are the first people that see that, and then it's usually family or colleagues, close colleagues and friends. So if we can educate all of those people around looking out for early warning signs, having a courageous conversation and saying, hey, you're not your normal, what can we do to help? We know that early intervention is the best intervention. So we need lots of surveillance and people that are willing to have that conversation and intervene early so that we can get people back on track. And I want to go back to the PTSD piece, because I think there's a lack of understanding about PTSD in the sense that there's actually an equal or sometimes more opportunity of developing something called post-traumatic growth, which is actually flourishing further than you would have before you actually were exposed to that trauma. So that's a real outcome as well. And we need
Wow,
to be putting in place
nobody's talking about that.
we need to be putting in place things that we know help people onto that trajectory to post-traumatic growth, as opposed to going down the PTSD or that kind of trauma symptomology route. So as I say, it's not all doom and gloom, but where there's lots of work to be done in this space to get it on track to that.
That is just so cool to hear. Thank you for sharing that. And I think, and one of these things that I think, you see, in the workplace generally, but I think it's partially all about not just what's happening within work, but realizing that your people are whole humans. They've got a whole life outside work. They don't come to work in the morning or at 2 o'clock in the morning or whenever the call comes in. They don't do that and then necessarily leave their argument with their partner or their kids who are off the rails with a drug addiction or whatever it might be. There's so much stuff that could be happening in your personal life, and then they have to just leave that at home. And then also actually they've got that support at home too. And so that's a really interesting interface, right? Because you've got a whole lot of staff here that you really care about. And then there's also a whole support network back at home. And so that's a really interesting. Is there anything you can share on that around is there an opportunity to kind of, support the supporters, if you will, of your frontline staff? I'm going way off script here, aren't I?
No problem. Absolutely. And I think, I sort of talk about surveillance because they are the loved ones and they're the ones that have been with them for years, if not since they were born. And so they can really see a change, even though that person might be trying really hard to cover the fact that they're struggling. They're going to see that. So it's about identifying those and having a conversation, but at the same time having some compassion and allowing them to engage in some of that stuff that might not be helpful. They might be hiding under a rock, like I said earlier. And sometimes it's really intolerable to face this stuff, and so kind of giving them some space to manage that, and I guess that's really challenging when you might be a partner and you might have children to manage together and your partner's hiding under a rock and they're not really that helpful. So it can be really taxing for families, so a little bit of understanding, but at the same time having the courage to say, hey, this isn't your normal, and sometimes this isn't okay, because there are some responses to trauma experiences that aren't okay, and we need to get help. So we at St John, and I'm sure other organisations too, are trying to kind of bring in some information and some psychoeducation around trauma, what the families can do, but also what can they talk to about with their families that they know St John offer. Hey, I know there's a peer support staff, I know peer supports around, maybe you need to go and have a conversation with your manager, have a conversation with one of your EAP providers. So trying to use them as another a nagger, a friendly, loving nagger.
Another path to support, right? And that's so important. And when I think surveillance, I think overwhelmingly negative thoughts. But in this context, it's actually about being tuned in to the person that either who's beside you at work, or, you know, having breakfast with you over the dinner table, like, and just noticing and being courageous enough to just say, look, you know, you felt a bit different the last few days. What's, you know, what does life feel like for you right now? You know, and you can, you know, there's all, and you've obviously got all the tools and all of the great questions that you can ask. And it sounds like, you know, I don't want to get into too much stuff to do with the HeadFit Awards, but St. John is obviously a sort of multi-award finalist for the HeadFit Awards this year, and you're doing some great stuff. So, you know, I kind of say to all of our HeadFit Awards finalists, you know, the work that you are doing is to be honoured. And so the awards, you know, the work that you're doing, that's the cake. And being a finalist in the HeadFit Awards, that is the icing. And the winners, you know, the winning of the award, I think that's the glitter on the icing on the cake. And so I just want to honour you and the work that you're doing now, because it just is incredible. And so what we're talking about, yeah, I'm sitting here with just a glass of water. Edible glitter. Dusting. All right, so back to you, Rebecca. Let's talk a little bit more about sort of Te Kiwi Māia. What's that long-term vision for it? You know, you're in the middle of you're bringing it together now. What does the future look like for you? How do people find out more, and how can they get behind this?
Yeah, so while we are waiting for our development, and before we can start building, we are starting to take some of our first responders away. So in May, we'll be taking our first group of 12 first responders away for a week, where we can start rolling out a program while we develop the site. So yeah, we're looking at working with FENS and St. John. So Adele is part of our wellness team. We have a lot to do with each other, and she's helping shape our future with Te Kiwi Māia, which is amazing. And Navy as well will be coming for our first group, so it's pretty cool. And then afterwards we will do the follow-on and make sure that they're looked after, and that we're working with the organisations for their aftercare as well. To follow us and to see what we're doing, we have a Facebook page, Instagram, and obviously our website, where we do updates all the time. If you want to know more information, just get in contact with me through the website. I'll be the one. Yeah, it'll be me that will be emailing you back. So yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's very exciting, and we are moving pretty fast now, which is really good to hear. I think, you know, watch this space. There's going to be some pretty big announcements coming up within the next few months, and yeah, it's just, I'm really looking forward to the future. I think there's a lot of I think it's about to change, and how we look after our people and how we collaborate in this space. So it's pretty cool.
That is so cool to hear, and it's neat to hear that you're not just waiting, right? If you wait long enough, there might be a property crash, so that'll be even better. I hear a buyer's market is finally.
Yeah,
you know, that's the thing. You're not waiting. You're not waiting.
No.
You're supporting people now, and I think that's just incredible.
Yeah,
and
well,
so,
we want to start doing something while we can. So.
Yeah, that's totally right. And that's already going to be having an impact on first responders, Defence Force staff, and their families who are in the firing line, so to speak.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so just moving back to Craig now. Craig, I understand what you're about to do. Serious to raise awareness funds for PTSD. Talk to me about the It's Okay ride for PTSD. What is that all about? How did you agree? You know, it's 1,000 Ks. I don't even think I could ride 10 Ks with my current pandemic level of fitness. Talk to me about what that's all about, and why you're doing it.
So what we're doing is we're riding from what's called the Kopeka Trail. So it's from Cape Egmont to East Cape, and it's just over 1,000 kilometres. How we got there is that my daughter's boyfriend, who's in the picture there, and my son's the other police officer, he was a good friend of Matt Hunt, went through the same wing at training college with him, and unfortunately Matt passed away a couple of years ago, and it's had quite an effect on James. and we're riding one day, and he said we should do something just to raise awareness around mental health, etc. And he was talking about a bike ride. So coming from Central Otago, you've got bike trails, you've got the Central Otago bike trail, etc. We talked more and more about it, and we came up with doing this ride. So I've been working closely with Police St John and FENS, and what it is going to be is it'll be over 13 days, and we're going to be calling in at most of the small centres on the way. We've got some very bright shirts and bright gear that we're wearing, and it's just about having conversations. So the word or the term "it's okay" is it's okay to talk. It's okay to ask your mate if they're okay. It's okay to seek help if you need help. So we're going to have some coffees and conversations, etc., on the way across. And also, as we were working through this, got to learn about Te Kiwi Māia as well. So had a chat with Rebecca and thought we can dovetail the two together around raising some funds in support of Te Kiwi Māia. So the two purposes of the ride, raise awareness, have some really cool conversations, and people will be able to follow that on our Facebook page, and also raise some funds to support Rebecca and her team. So, and we've got to give a little page as well that you can go to off our Facebook page. So really looking forward to it. Done a little bit of cycling, trying to get a bit fitter. I've got a 22-year-old son that hasn't done any training whatsoever other than the gym and reckons he's just going to smash it, which he probably will. But I'm anticipating that he's not going to feel too good after the first 2 or 3 days. But we're really looking forward to it. There's 3 of us cycling, and I've got my brother-in-law who's going to be tagging along with the vehicle, just with a bit of support gear as well.
That's amazing. Yeah, hats off to you. And I just think, you know, it's good for your fitness. It's good to raise awareness. I'm assuming you might have some people joining in, like maybe not the whole length, but can people join in if they want to kind of jump on their bike and, you know, not just cheer along, but actually.
Yeah, we've had some people contacting us on via Messenger and so on, and direct email. And I think just about on most of the stages, there's going to be 1 or 2 people joining us, just even if it's cycling for 15 or 20 Ks and then back home again. So that'll be pretty cool as well.
Wow. Oh, that's wonderful. And so people can, I put the link up before, but you can jump on to Give a Little and search for, if you go under the Te Kiwi Māia page on Give a Little, this is one of the fundraising events that's being done for that. So. Look, we've got time for just a few questions now. I probably should have been prompting our viewers just during the call and during the session. If you've got questions, you can just pop them in, whether you're on LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook. Just pop your questions to any of our panelists into the chat or into the comments against this live feed. And our experts will be very happy to answer your questions. I'm just going to go on mute because I need to cough. Excuse me. Okay. All right. We'll just give it a minute. If you've got a question, a burning question, you can always reach out to me afterwards, and I can link you up with Adele, Craig, or Rebecca. Other than that, we're happy to take your questions now. This is hopefully a good sign. No questions. All right. So just as we wrap now, I just want to thank each of you for the work that you do every day. You know, you're doing this for the right reasons, and you know, we need more people like you in New Zealand. I liken this country to a waka, and you know, we got 5 million people in it, and you know, the more people that we can have rowing forward, whether that is in becoming volunteer firefighters, getting involved in these, you know, getting involved in St John, being a reservist for the Navy. You know, I think it's an amazing, you know, there's a lot of opportunities for New Zealanders. And so thank you, each of you, for the work that you do every day and so the work that you do outside of that, right? You know, Craig, I don't know how you do it, man. You know, you're amazing. So look, I think just to wrap, but perhaps if we could just go around the ground, starting with, we'll go clockwise from me. just go around. We'll go around to Adele, Rebecca, and Craig. If you had one kind of message or one thing that you wanted to say to a Defence Force personnel member or an emergency first responder, now what would you say to them? What's your one thing? Oh, we've got a question. Okay, so we'll do that. So Adele, what are you recommending to foster growth? It says PT growth.
Oh, PTSD. So post-traumatic growth.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Yep.
Awesome. So essentially there's some, evidence that suggests things like, and the reason why we have things like peer support and managers is around talking about the event. We know that processing it out loud, or even doesn't actually need to be verbally, it can be writing or in some creative way of expressing what occurred for you, is a really therapeutic tool to help you process it. We know that PTSD or trauma is sort of a disorder of memory. And so if we're able to kind of make sense of the story that has occurred for us, for the beginning, a middle, and an end, it's really helpful. So creating what they call an acceptable narrative, just fancy terms to talking it through and processing it out loud in some way is helpful. Things like exercise, which isn't my jam, but clearly it's Craig's jam, and maybe not so much Grant's jam in the pandemic, but is proven to be really helpful. It helps lower those cortisol levels, which we know are spiking when people are going through a traumatic kind of processing trauma. So exercise is really helpful. Sleep, which can be really challenging if you're a first responder in a shift work model, but prioritizing sleep, getting that. We know that you actually process trauma when you're getting really good sleep. I'm innately lazy. I tell everybody this. And so if I can do anything in my sleep, that would be beneficial. So you can actually process trauma in sleep. So prioritizing that, making sure you're getting good quality sleep. So there's some things that can be really helpful. Talking it through, getting good sleep, and exercising are some really good ways in helping us navigate trauma and getting towards more that post-traumatic growth space.
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing that. And that's that practical lens, isn't it? And sometimes it's not. There's a lot of science there, but actually knowing what to do in a way that's meaningful for you, right? Because our well-being and our mental health is quite dynamic and subjective, and so what works for one person is not going to work for another. So it's giving maximum tools in the toolbox.
Absolutely.
While we're with you, Adele, if you had one thing that you would want to say to a first responder or a Defence Force personnel member, what would that be?
I think it's be intentional about learning about yourself. So learn what works for you, because you'll have people telling you should try this, you should do that. And absolutely, those are things that work for them and they might work for you, but trialing things. So what things just keep your status quo well-being? Is it engaging in yoga, mindfulness? Is it around exercise or, chatting with a good friend over coffee? What are things that really work for you when the going gets tough? And what things work for you when just to keep you generally well, and what are those early warning signs? I think that's a really good space to think about and pay some intentional notice to that. After event, is it that you can't concentrate properly or you have sleepless nights? What's your normal when you are experiencing that? So intention and looking after yourself and working through what works best for you.
Incredible. Thanks, Adele. And Rebecca, what would you say if you could just say one thing to any Defence Force personnel who might be watching this morning?
If I was to say anything to my friends, my Defence Force and all our first responders, I would say thank you for their service. I would say to them that they are really appreciated, even though they don't feel it sometimes, especially in the hard times, and that there are so many services out there and people that do care about them, and everyone is trying their best, and that we are here to support them. So I would just reiterate how much that they're loved. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's so cool. Thank you for sharing that. And finally, Craig, what would you say to yourself? No, what would you say to other first? What's one thing, like, if you could have them take away one thing from today, what would that be?
I used to be, Adele talked about people being very stoic. So when I was farming for a living and generations of farming, I was a very, very stoic person who admitting that you had something wrong in this space meant that you were showing weakness. So I was in a community where that never ever happened. I think that's changed a lot now. But what would I say to other emergency service personnel is that you're not alone. So you sit there and think you're the only one having those thoughts. And then that creates a little bit of doubt as to whether you should put your hand up or have that conversation or talk to somebody, etc. And you'll probably find that if you do put your hand up, other people on your watch or other people in your unit or brigade are having exactly the same thoughts. And then you can start to draw on some of that support as well. So it's okay to say something.
Yeah, it's okay to surveil yourself too, right?
Yes.
It's so awesome.
Don't beat yourself up.
Adele Saunders, Rebecca Nelson, Craig Macdonald, thank you so much for joining us for this HeadFit Live session today. We'd love to connect with you later on. If there's any questions that come through from people who've been watching today, just reach out to me and I can pass those through to our panelists. Can't wait to see you for the next HeadFit Live event, and reach out if you've got ideas for subjects. Thanks so much, each of you, for giving your time today at the bright early hour of 8 a.m. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
See you, everybody.